Is artificial intelligence bad? This is a question that is currently making the rounds across the internet in the wake of a couple of big releases in the intelligence space. I'm talking about Lensa.ai specifically, which is a photo app, and also ChatGBT, which, wow, this is going to be a different episode about ChatGBT. But for today, I'm going to focus on specifically the photo app, Lensa AI, and the artificial intelligence conversation in general. So stick around. You're in for a great show.
This is the Player Position Podcast, where we huddle up, call the plays, and inspire you to run your ball into the end zone. Are you ready to score more game-winning touchdowns in your life, business, and career? Then listen up, because it's game time, baby. Now, here's your host, Mary Lou Kaiser.
Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the Play Your Position podcast. I'm your host, Mary Lou Kaiser. Thanks so much for joining me today. In today's episode, I am going to be exploring this latest wave of artificial intelligence, specifically some apps that are making the rounds and causing a lot of buzz. I will say that if you are interested in reading a more in-depth post about this, you can visit my sister site, maryloukaiser.com, and go to the blog tab. And there you can find images that I'm going to be talking about. And obviously you can't see when you're listening to a podcast, so go check it out. And I've also got some other great stuff going on over there. So let's get to it. The question that I'm asking, and I know I'm not alone in this, and it's certainly a leadership question: is artificial intelligence bad? Is it bad, what's happening right now with these new apps coming out? If you've been hanging out on social media recently, I suspect you've caught sight of the latest avatar phenomenon generated by artificial intelligence. Use of an app called Lensa.ai to create these selfies has surged lately, particularly by people on Instagram. Now, I got in on the game after seeing someone I follow on Instagram post artificial intelligence generated photos of himself. The images struck me immediately. And then, of course, being the curious person that I am, I went to check out Lensa.ai. I downloaded the app to my phone and I gave it a try with my own selfies. If you go to, again, the blog post, maryloukaiser.com, you can see some of the images that Lensa.ai generated of me. And, the role that AI is playing in our lives and will most likely continue to play moving forward is growing. Now, a note, if you're going to go play with Lensa.ai, there is a fee to generate the magic avatars. I think you can get 50 for like $3 or $4 or something like that, and you can get more for more. But just letting you know, you're going to have to pay if you want to see them. And I felt it was worth less than a cup of coffee at Starbucks to see what came back. And it was interesting, and I'll get to that in a minute. The debate around artificial intelligence isn't new. People have been questioning the role of robots for years, particularly with respect to robots taking over jobs. And it is true that many jobs have been replaced by machines, but that doesn't mean that good jobs are no longer available. It just means that the job market has changed as technology advances. And this has been true throughout human history. I think back to accounts that I read when I was in high school and college about the Industrial Revolution and how that really changed the whole landscape of the 20th century. When Henry Ford developed the Model T and the Model A, he had to have a way of mass producing these things. And hence the whole industrial complex came about. Well, now We're in the midst of the digital revolution. We have been for quite some time, and it's accelerating. It seems like it's accelerating every year. Now that we're out of the pandemic and we're looking ahead, it's no coincidence that these apps that are utilizing AI and machine learning are accelerating too and becoming more available. Now, there are other people who believe that we are doomed to destroy ourselves with robots and artificial intelligence, that machine learning and AI will at one point become smarter than we are and cause humanity's demise. This storyline has certainly been popular in films and docuseries for years, and while it makes for good entertainment, I'm more interested in the effects that easy access to AI apps like Lensa.ai are having on our collective mental health, both the positive effects and the negative. Okay, so there's always two sides. I believe in universal law, and the law of polarity states you can't have one without the other. So if we're going to have negative effects, well, there's going to be positive effects. And if we're going to have positive effects, we're going to have negative effects. So let's look at AI's potential upside first. Okay. The images that Lensa AI generated for me gave me a way of seeing myself I'd never experienced before. And I believe this experience has value. It's healthy to shake up our perspective, especially of ourselves. Every now and again, it's good for us to see ourselves in new and different ways. Now, all the better if we can laugh from the experience, and AI generates avatars that do that job quite nicely. In fact, on a side note, if you follow Will Smith, the actor, on Instagram, he posted a set of avatars that AI generated for him. And of course, he made fun of himself. He said something to the effect of, well, all you guys are posting these beautiful masterpieces through AI. Look at my ears and this funny expressions on my face. Now, you would expect that from a comedian like Will Smith. And despite everything that's happened to him since the Oscar debacle last March, he still is showing up, and he's engaging on social media again after taking some time off and then offering his apology to Chris Rock. So it's good to see that even something as massively global as that incident was at the Oscars in 2022, it's really cool to see that he's rebounding and he's owning his shit. He owns that he screwed up, and good for him. And so now he's laughing at these AI generated avatars, which this is good. This is good, right? Now, I chuckled at some of mine, but I'm not going to lie. Some of the images I got back did not make me laugh. Some of the images made me feel something I couldn't identify until I had a conversation about it with my daughter. She said, "Oh, Mom, you were probably experiencing the uncanny valley." The uncanny valley, I said. This was a new term to me. So I did some reading about it, and in essence, this is what the uncanny valley is. And I'm quoting here. The uncanny valley is a concept first introduced in the 1970s by Masahiro Mori, who was then a professor at the Tokyo Institute of Technology. Mori coined the term uncanny valley to describe his observation that as robots appear more human-like, they become more appealing, but only up to a certain point. Upon reaching the uncanny valley, our affinity descends into a feeling of strangeness, a sense of unease, and a tendency to be scared or freaked out. So the uncanny valley can be defined as people's negative reaction to certain lifelike robots. Yes, I said to my daughter, I felt strange and uneasy seeing some of the images of myself because they kind of look like me and also not at all. And then I texted her a handful of them, and she's like, "Oh, wow, Mom." And I said, "I know, right?" She then told me which one was her favorite. And I was thinking to myself, wow, isn't that interesting? I like the one she picked, but it's not my favorite. So that comes into, again, how we see ourselves versus how others see us, right? That to me is an interesting conversation. It's an interesting experience. Some other positive effects of seeing myself rendered through the lens of AI. First, power. I make a badass warrior woman. One of the sets of avatars that comes back puts you in these warrior type landscapes and situations and costumes. And I liked that. It gave me confidence. I'm looking at some of these going, man, I am a beautiful masterpiece painting. One of these classic painters of old, had he, painted me, I'm like, damn, looking good there. And then affirming, yeah, that is me, a little different, but sure, it's still me. So it affirms for me the general sense I have of myself. So can artificial intelligence help us see ourselves in new ways without spiraling down a rabbit hole from which we can't return? If you have a healthy sense of self, the answer to that question is yes. It absolutely is fine. Playing with apps like Lensa AI boils down to an hour or so of entertainment with a pocket full of personal growth thrown in for good measure. And there's nothing wrong with that, right? But what about children and adolescents who are still developing their sense of self, who are still forming their identities, who aren't confident or struggle with self-esteem? And what about adults who struggle with mental health issues or feel marginalized because of their heritage or their sexual orientation, or, fill in the blank? Can creating avatars from selfies using AI cause problems for people like this? Which brings me to the potentially negative side of AI. One, if you're not in good mental or emotional space, these AI-generated avatars, they can really fuck with your head. Going into the uncanny valley can send people spiraling. I learned, for example, that when the original Shrek was first being test marketed before the final version was released, some children watched a pre-release version of that movie and responded poorly to how Princess Fiona looked. They were completely freaked out. They couldn't handle it. They were crying. They were scared. So the animators had to go back and make adjustments to Princess Fiona so she didn't look too realistic, because crying in fear were not the responses that the filmmakers wanted from their audience with Shrek. I get if you're making a horror movie, right? The next Friday the 13th or Halloween or something. Yeah, you're looking to scare your audience. But Shrek is a kid's movie. They didn't want that. So for young people particularly who are still developing their sense of self, cartoonizing, artificially intelligent-sizing themselves with filters on Snapchat or filters on any of the photo apps that we have access to may not be a good thing. Sometimes the app pushes back inappropriate images. And if you go to, again, MaryLouKaiser.com and click on blog and find this article, this post I made, you can see one of my avatars has a weird third arm coming from who knows where. I mean, there were a handful of these renderings, and I'm like, wait a minute, what the heck is this? And again, there's a couple of links in the post that can take you to some pretty interesting articles about that. Kids and adolescents particularly are already feeling susceptible to that sense of I'm an outsider, I don't fit in. They're wondering, am I good enough? How do I compare? And asking questions like that, it's part of growing up. But when you mesh apps we don't yet understand the long-term ramifications of, with easy access on our phones or our computers or our tablets, you're kind of putting together a recipe for a massive mental health disaster, as if we already don't have one now coming out of COVID, right? If you've seen the documentary, The Social Dilemma, you know what I'm talking about. Great documentary, by the way, if you haven't watched it. The constant exposure to everybody else's highlight reel is wreaking havoc on millions and millions of people, particularly young people. Magic avatars are not immune from this comparing equation. So AI adds layers of complexity to the overall conversation. All right. I really believe, this is a show about what happens when we answer to the call to leadership? Ultimately, it's about taking responsibility for our lives. It's about saying yes to life, to showing up, to not standing on the sidelines and watching everybody else play the game. It's about getting in to the game, even though it's going to be messy and we know we're going to get knocked down. And sometimes we're going to get hurt. And sometimes things are not going to go according to plan. Well, you introduce these powerful tools into the ecosystem that anybody can access. And we have a whole new set of questions that are just beginning to unfold. But it's a conversation, and there are questions that we need to be having and asking often. We need to not just think, oh, it's a passing fad, or put our heads in the sand and say, I don't have the bandwidth to deal with this, okay? New technology is going to have effects on us. It's happening now, and it's going to continue into the future. And as parents, as business leaders, as citizens, we need to be paying attention, okay? And as we go deeper into the 21st century and that line between living in the natural world where oceans, their tides rise and fall, and the sun rises and the moon rises and sets, and stars and trees and squirrels and dogs and cats and chimpanzees and all of these living creatures, right? We are a part of that biological world, but we're also living in the digital world all the time. I'm in that digital world right now. You are in that digital world right now listening to me. That line is getting blurrier. We have got to think more critically about how we are showing up to technology, what we're bringing into our real lives, and what we're not going to allow, or we're going to choose to learn about so that we can engage with them intelligently and not just blindly accept, oh, they're here now, right? Many of us have been using AI for years. Think about it. If you have a smartphone, if you have an iPhone or an Android, you are using AI constantly. You know, if you on an iPhone ask Siri for directions, guess what? That's AI. If you use Alexa from Amazon to order things or to turn your lights on and off in your house, you're using AI, right? I guess my big message here is we need to pay attention to the trends and ask bigger questions and be aware of what's going on. So going back to my original question that started this whole thing today, is artificial intelligence bad? I'm not sure that's the right question to ask. It's certainly not going away anytime soon. I think it's more important to first ask ourselves how we're using these tools. What is the impact that has on our communities, our work, the ability to make a living, things around climate, things around working together as a global community to solve some of our big problems, develop programs and education around what AI means in the human conversation and how we can integrate it into our lives thoughtfully and respectfully. I will leave you with this food for thought. 3 questions. In what ways can AI be used for good? When does too much AI become too much? And how do we make sense of that extra arm draped unnaturally across our shoulder in the magic avatar? Well, there you have it for today, team. Thanks so much for listening to today's episode of the Play Your Position podcast. Remember, it is always a great day to get out there and play your position. This is Mary Lou Kaiser. I look forward to seeing you again really soon. In the meantime, make it a great day. Bye for now.
Here at the Play Your Position podcast, we believe that the road to self-mastery and a life well lived starts with answering the call to leadership. That's when the fun really begins. Send this episode to any friends who might need to hear the inspiration and ideas you heard today. And feel free to rate and review us on your favorite podcast platform.